Violence against children is widespread. Millions of children around the world, including here in Sri Lanka, experience violence in their homes, in their schools, online.
මාස දෙකකින් ඉඳන් තමයි ළමා නිවාසයක ආවා. මේ කොහොමද ආවි කියලා නම් දන්නේ නැහැ. මම දිගටම හැදුනා වැඩුණා ඒ ළමා නිවාසය ඇතුළෙම වගේ ගෙදරක් විදියට. ලොකු වෙනකොට මට තේරුණා මේක නෙමෙයි ඇත්තම ගෙදර. මට කියලාම වෙනම සමාජයක් ගෙදරක් තියෙනවා පවුලක් තියෙනවා කියලා. ඉස්කෝලේ යනකොට එහෙම ගොඩක් ඒ ගැන දුක හිතෙනවා. මොකද ඉස්කෝලේ ඉන්න ළමයි ඔක්කොලාම අම්මලා තාත්තලාත් එක්ක හැදෙන්නේ. ඒ වගේම ගොඩක් ඔය වගේ ඉස්කෝලේ my family කියලා ඉංග්‍රීසි වලින් එහෙම ලියන්න එනකොට ඉංග්‍රීසි පීරියඩ් එහෙම ගොඩක් අසරණ වෙනවා. ලියන්න විදියක් නැහැ මොනවද ලියන්න ඕනි කියලා. පවුලක් කියන දේ අදින්න කිව්වම මොකක්ද අදින්න ඕනේ? ඒව මුකුත් තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ මොකක්ද අදින්න ඕනේ කියලා. ඒ වගේම ළමයි නිවාස ඇතුළේ නෝඩ පේරන්ට්ස් ඩේ කියලා වෙනම දවසක් තියෙනවා. ඒ දවසට අනිත් කට්ටිය අම්මලා එනකොට අන්දන්නේ මම මොනවා කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා ඒ වෙලාවට ගොඩක් පැත්තකට වෙලා ගිහිලා අඬනවා. මොනවාද ඒ වෙලාවට අනිත් කට්ටිය අම්මලා ගෙනල්ලා සතුටින් ඉන්නවා. එතකොට මම දන්නේ මම කොහොමද එයාලත් එක්කම බොරුවට සතුට මුක්ති විඳිනවා වගේ ඉන්නවා. ඒ වගේ ගොඩක් හැංගීම් එනවා. පවුලක් ඕනෙම නැහැ කියලා හිතනවා. මොකද මෙච්චර එයාලා ඒ කාලෙම දාලා ගියා නම් දැන් මොකටද ආපහු කියලා හිතනවා. හොයන්නේ දෙමව්පියන්ගේ ආදරේ. ඒ නිසා ඒක ජීවිත කාලෙටම වටින දෙයක්. සමාජයට කියන පණිවිඩයක් ලෙස එයාලට කියන්න තියෙන්නේ ඒ වගේ වැඩ කරන්නේ නැතුව මුණ දුප්පත්කමක් තිබ්බත් අමාරුකමක් තිබ්බත් ළමයව කොහොම හරි තියෙන සල්ලි වලින් හදාගෙන එයාව උස්මහත් කරන්න කියලා.
Hello there and a very good morning. This is Newsline. I'm Sonali Wanigapaduke. Joining us is a very special guest here in our studios. He's Tim Sutton, UNICEF representative to Sri Lanka. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
And thanks so much for joining us. Tim, it's significant that World Children's Day is being marked next week, and also preventing violence against children in Sri Lanka is that the UNICEF has been very closely working with regard to the national program. If we take, for example, the National Partnership to End Violence Against Children by 2030, you have been closely working with the government of Sri Lanka and other multiple stakeholders. As a precursor to this conversation, let's start off there.
So, first of all, congratulations to all of Sri Lanka's children, their parents, their relatives, to celebrate Children's Day on October 1st. It's a great day, and this year it's a particularly great day because grand coalition emerging between civil society, government, parents, children, all sorts of organisations and the international community in support to end violence against children. Why is ending violence against children so important? Violence, it's been accepted for so long, but what's really changing now is that there's not only just a moral argument for saying violence against children is wrong. There's real hard scientific data which shows that the impact of violence on children is serious. It has lifelong repercussions for the children involved, it is intergenerational, and that it costs a country an enormous amount in terms of lost growth and lost potential opportunities. So it's great that Sri Lanka is really focusing on ending violence on this Children's Day, and Sri Lanka is one of 12 Pathfinder countries. It's one of the 12 leading countries in the world that are saying we want to end violence against children in all its forms by 2030, and we're going to take the lead on this and show other countries how this can be done.
This year is particularly significant, Tim, because in celebration of this National Day, 3 films will also be aired focusing on 3 of the main subjects, that is sexual abuse, neglect, and corporal punishment. How are these impacting the lives of children in Sri Lanka, and how important is it to be aware about the violence taking place?
How is it impacting? First of all, let's just start with a sense of scale on this. People might think that violence against children is a relatively rare event. Last year, there were 9,000 reported cases to the NCPA. Now, I'm no mathematician, but that works out to nearly 1 every hour of every day. 1 child is being abused, and that abuse is being reported. We know that there are many more cases of abuse happening that are not being reported. So this is on an enormous scale. But as I said before, the impacts on children and their families are lifelong and intergenerational, and we have scientific evidence to prove this now. What happens when a child is exposed to or witnesses violence is chemicals are released in the brain, and this is called toxic stress, and what it actually does is it changes the makeup of the brain. It stunts its development, and these changes, and it can actually change the genes of that individual so that the effects of violence, this toxic stress, can be transmitted across 2 to 3 generations before that impact wears off. So it has an enormous impact on the individual and their family and their community. But it's what we are also understanding is that it has a tremendous impact on our future as a nation, as a country. Violence against children costs 2% of GDP annually across Asia, including Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka grew at, 4.7% last year, but we lost 2% of that GDP because of the impact of violence against children in our society. Imagine how much more prosperous, how much more developed Sri Lanka could be, how much better Sri Lanka could be if we were able to end this drag on our economic growth. So there's the moral arguments. There's the just hitting children, perpetuating violence against children in all its forms is just wrong. There's no doubt about that. But the scientific evidence, it's changing their brains. It's like malnutrition. The effects are lifelong. And then, there's an economic argument. If people aren't human enough to realize that the moral outrage of this, at least look at the economic argument. 2% of GDP each year being lost because people are perpetuating violence against children.
Tim, violence does not only include the physical aspect, it also includes the psychological trauma, which is sometimes more permanent in nature. Let's talk a bit about that. So violence is physical, sexual, emotional, neglect, all those things constitute violence and abuse and neglect of children. Now, we know this is a serious problem in Sri Lanka. First of all, there's the issue that people think that violence against children is perpetuated by strangers. It's something that happens on the way home from school or something. 90% of cases of violence against children are perpetuated by someone known to the victim, and that's a Sri Lanka study. In another study, we found that 40.7% of parents admitted using physical abuse, and 76.3% of them admitted actions against their children that amounted to corporal punishment. So when we're addressing violence against children,
Yes, we need to look to the government for leadership. Yes, we need to look to civil society organisations. Yes, we need to, join movements and watch films and all that, but we need to take a hard look at ourselves. And we need to understand that our children are so precious. They are given to us, and we're trusted with their upbringing, and we just can't use violence in any form against those children. There are so many other better ways to help the child develop, to grow, to turn into a worthwhile and contributing member of our society than using a stick or using a fist or sexually abusing or even emotionally harming children. We have to stop it, and we can.
How are we to do that? How are we to go about doing it? Given the fact that this message that you just gave to our viewers on TV1, that this message needs to be disseminated to the larger public, the masses in Sri Lanka.
And I think programs like this are a great way to further the conversation. And I purposely don't say start the conversation. I think the conversation is already happening. But we need to spread the conversation. We need to grow the conversation. We need to change the social norms that pervade, that says, actually in a school, it's okay to hit a child. It's not. And the Ministry of Education has already put out a circular. They did that a number of years ago. But we actually have to stop it. We need to have better enforcement, but we also need to, create demand. People need to realise that hitting children in schools, for instance, is not acceptable, and parents need to protest, if you like. They need to talk to principals, teachers, and say, this is not acceptable. I do not allow you to hit my child. There are other ways to enforce discipline in a classroom. There are, in our families, we need to make sure, it's not good enough to whack a child because they do something wrong. It's not good enough.
Tim, you're talking about an attitudinal shift in the minds, the mindsets of Sri Lankans. This is a massive task.
Absolutely. So we're giving ourselves to 2030, so we've got a few years to work, but it has to start. And, societal norms do change. I'm from New Zealand. I made the joke when I was working in the Pacific, social norms can change, and I can prove it. In the country that I was working in at the time, it was the social norm after a battle to eat the people that they conquered. Cannibalism, 150 years ago, it was the social norm. It's not anymore. In my own country, I went to school and physical punishment was part of the school system. It is no longer. There is an anti-smacking law. You're not allowed to smack children. Social norms change, and they can change in Sri Lanka, and there's the will for that to change. The government is showing great leadership on this by joining this global partnership to end violence and saying, we're one of the 12 countries that is going to do this, we're going to achieve it, and we're going to show the rest of the world how to do this. And I think that's fantastic. We need to support this and grow this movement.
Right. How do you suggest that we need to grow this movement, as you said, involving the participation of multiple stakeholders? How do we go about doing that?
Well, I think there's all sorts of things. I think we need to make sure that all the various elements that make up our community and our society are engaged in this. We need to make sure that the education system is engaged in this fully. We need to make sure that the social welfare and protection services are strengthened and fully engaged and looking for danger signs and trying to work with families to prevent this happening. We need to make sure that the health system is recognising forms of abuse when children come to hospital and is able to refer those so that the families that are involved get the support. We need to do all sorts of things, but I think one of the most important things that I'd like to say to your viewers is you have to get involved and you have to take action. There's a decision that we all need to make. That is, actually, this is not good enough. And I need to change. We all need to change. And we've got wonderful tools now as citizens, including social media, which, it enables us to have these conversations, to raise issues, to get people engaged. And it's through that process of every person in the end saying, this is not good enough, I need to change, and I need to support others to change, that we can change this very entrenched social norm.
Right. Now, in Sri Lanka specifically, there's an attitude that people have if they are not personally affected by an issue, or if their children are not personally affected by an issue, they just turn away.
Yeah.
So this is an attitudinal problem that we face when we talk about a lot of different issues. Even when it comes to child abuse and violence against children, we are seeing this. How does one then change one's attitude to not really not care about something that impacts an entire country?
Well, I think with the level of violence against children that we know about, and we've talked about 9,000 reported cases, and we think that's the tip of the iceberg. Everyone is, nearly everyone, is probably affected or knows a family where there is violence being perpetuated. Probably it's that widespread. So everyone is actually touched by this. There's the moral argument that it's wrong, and actually if we believe something strongly enough, we have to act on it. But at the end of the day, you know, it comes back to the point that what is the Sri Lanka that we want in the future? You know, do we want a Sri Lanka that is able to take its place in the modern digital economy, is able to be prosperous, is an innovative place? If we want that, and if we want Sri Lanka to become even more prosperous, we have to take notice of this, and we have to act against it. It's our next generation, it's our young people that are going to drive our future as a nation forward. We have to do the very best we can for them. And I go back to but if all those arguments fail, the moral argument that, we turn a blind eye, just think of it economically. 2% of GDP we are losing each year because we are letting this violence happen. We only grew as an economy by 4.7% last year. If we had been able to eliminate violence in this country, our growth would have been over 6%. So there's just a plain economic argument. If we want to be better off, more prosperous, we have to deal with this issue. And and if we want a more cohesive and more socially stable society, we can't build that if our children are learning that to be hit and to perpetuate violence against others is okay. We can't do that. That's not going to build the solid foundations that we as Sri Lanka need to move forward.
Getting back to this national partnership that was launched to end violence against children by 2030, Tim, could you also elucidate on the roadmap that is being introduced?
So the roadmap is being introduced at an event on Sunday, and that sets out the steps that the government of Sri Lanka and the various partners in this national and international campaign are going to be taking. But all of it comes down to the basic things. We must, as individuals, decide and take action. The government can provide clear leadership and, if you like, moral direction for this. And they're saying that this is important. We have to deal with it. And we're one of 12 countries that have stuck our hand up and saying, we do not want violence against our children, and we want to eliminate this by 2030. So it behoves all of us to get in behind this approach. If we're in business, if we're working in a school, if we're working anywhere, we must not accept that if we see something happening that we think is violence against children, we can't stay silent.
So a zero tolerance policy of violence against children is what you're talking about?
Absolutely, that's what we have to get to. And it's not easy, but it can happen and it will happen.
All right, so this week saw the Vidya Sivaloganadan case where death sentences were handed down to 7 accused. We saw justice prevailing in the time span of a little over 2 years. Tim, it's important that we also speak about the perpetrators of violence against children. How do you suppose we need to deal with these perpetrators? Because violence is not just one-sided. We can't just look only at the victims. We also need to look at the perpetrators.
Yeah. Well, I think anyone who commits a crime is subject to and is arrested for that, is subject to the law, and the law takes its own way. But I actually would like to turn that back to the victims of the violence, because they suffer in the judicial system as well.
Sure.
And that case was resolved in 2.5 years, I think. The average is much longer.
Absolutely.
Much longer. 7 years, 8 years, 9 years is not uncommon. There are, I think, 7,000 cases currently in the judicial system waiting for resolution. Now, if a child is brave enough to report something like this and enter into this judicial process, if you like, that this can carry on for 7, 8, 9 years is in a sense a crime again against those victims.
So the victim is being victimized again and again.
Because it is just too slow. If a child reports this when they're 14, 15, and this cases are being resolved till they're 22, 23, this is not good enough. And how can that victim, if you like, move on? And if they have to re-engage with the court system about something that happened 7 years ago, and all strength and courage to them for doing that, because they need to do it. But it's an awful toll we're exacting on these young victims. So I take your point that, you know, the perpetrators of violence, you know, I wouldn't want to comment on sentences or anything like that, but, you know, the judicial system, our legal system needs to do a better job for our victims.
So at the moment there are delays, substantial delays in the legal system of Sri Lanka, and you feel that we need to rectify that?
Absolutely, and it is possible, and it's one of the things that we'll be working very hard with various authorities on.
Right.
And I think we have done a small pilot project where we've been able to bring down the case processing time to 6 months, which is still a little bit too long, but that's a lot better than 7, 8, 9 years, even 2.5 years in this very high profile case. So it is possible, it needs to be done for justice to be served.
Tim, my final question to you. Ideally, how should Sri Lankans get involved in this process, in this collective effort of ending violence against children? Well,
a great way to start would be to watch this program, discuss it with their friends, and if they want to find out more, to find out more through the internet, social media, etc. We have the 3 films that we've produced covering sexual abuse, corporal punishment and neglect. These are very powerful movies, and I know they're going to be shown on this channel. But they are also downloadable from our website, Unicef.lk /endviolence. And that's a great way, because those films are very much from the victim's point of view. They're the victim's stories, and I would challenge anyone watching those not to be moved by those and feel that they need to do something. So I would say, please go and watch the films on this channel, or go to our website and download them and look at them, and take action.
Thank you very much, Tim Sutton, UNICEF representative to Sri Lanka. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Newsline.
In Sri Lanka, we are witnessing an increase in the number of reported cases of violence against boys and girls. Violence against children can be in the form of physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, or exploitation.
நான் ஸ்கூலுக்கு சேரக்குள்ள ஒழுங்காக தான் அம்மா சேர்த்தாங்க. 1ஆம் ஆண்டு 1லேருந்து 3 வரைக்கும் நல்லா படித்தேன். ஆண்டு 3லேருந்து எனக்கு பிரச்சனை.
எந்த பிள்ளை குழப்படி செஞ்சாலும் எங்களோட பிள்ளை தான் செய்யுதுன்னு சொல்லி ஒவ்வொரு நாளும் அடிச்சு சின்னதிலேருந்து அடிச்சு நாசப்படுத்தினேன்.
Did I get that right?